traumatic, and chaotic than previously known. At least 18 infants and toddlers under 2 years old were taken away from their parents at the border and kept apart for up to 6 months. Something's wrong with that picture. At least 241 separated children were kept in Border Patrol facilities longer than the 72 hours permitted by law. And many separated children were kept in government custody far longer than previously known, for more than a year. Second, the Trump administration has not been candid with the American people about its purpose in separating children. The administration claimed that separating children was necessary to prosecute parents, but the documents describe parents who were never sent to federal criminal custody. Other parents were briefly taken into custody, but then returned, likely because prosecutors declined to prosecute or they were sentenced to time served. That did not matter, however, because their children were taken away anyway. In some cases, the documents show that parents were returned to the same facilities they left just hours before, but their children were gone. Imagine that horror. Imagine the horror of a parent coming back hours later and suddenly their children gone. Third, the nightmare of child separation continues. Hundreds of additional children have been separated from their parents since a court ordered an end to the administration's, quote, zero tolerance, unquote, policy more than a year ago. At least 30 children separated under that policy remain separated today, despite the court's order to reunite them with their families or place them with sponsors. And so, overall, the evidence shows that the administration's policies are causing the problems at the border, not helping to resolve them. The administration is detaining thousands of people who do not need to be detained and are not required to be detained. The policies are contributing to massive overcrowding, which is aggravating conditions, draining supplies, endangering the health and safety of both detainees and government personnel. And so I am looking forward to our witnesses today. And today, my hope is that we can agree on several basic points. Anyone in the custody of our government, especially a child, must be treated humanely and with respect. Children should not be separated from their mothers or fathers unless there is a true need for it. And our government must meticulously track both children and their parents so they can be reunited or placed with sponsors as quickly as possible. And to the members of the committee and our witnesses, I hope that we all, as we go through this hearing, will ask one basic question. My favorite saying is, our children are the living messengers we send to a future we will never see. And I ask you to ask us of ourselves the question, how are we sending these children into their future? How are we sending them? And another question, would you allow this for your own child? Would you allow it? And so this is, again, this is our watch, and I'm looking forward to us doing everything in our power to make sure that we are living up to those values as a nation. Now, there will be discussions of things that may have happened in the past. This is our watch right now. These kids are suffering right now. And with that, I yield to the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we're going to hear from Democrats this morning is astonishing. Will be truly astonishing. For months, they declared there wasn't even a crisis on the border. Senator Warren said a fake crisis at the border is fear-mongering of the worst kind, and we're not falling for it. But weeks later, Democrats sure have changed their tune. Chairman just recently said Congress cannot ignore the humanitarian crisis at the border. For years now, Republicans have been warning about the crisis and working hard to find solutions, and all the while Democrats have denied there was even a problem. This is not about politics. It's always been about preserving the integrity of our border and preventing the humanitarian crisis that we are all now witnessing. Democrats are in charge here. They set the agenda. The chairman could have had this hearing on a border crisis in January. He could have had one in February or March or April. Instead, prioritize political hearings like the hearing, like the hearing we first had, Michael Cohen, months and months ago. Think about this. The President made his emergency supplemental request only 2 days after that hearing. We knew even then that it was urgent. Instead of giving a platform to a convicted felon, we could have come here to address the border crisis. Only now the situation has reached the point that Democrats cannot ignore it. They finally decided to acknowledge that there is, in fact, a real crisis on the border. After months of the problem being pointed out and urgent calls for more funding, it wasn't until just before the July 4th recess that the House Democrats finally agreed, after waiting 8 weeks, finally agreed for pass the $4.6 billion supplemental emergency funding bill to provide some of the resources needed at the border. And despite the size and scope of the crisis, even this funding bill was not supported by many of the Democrats, including some testifying today. Once again, they would rather play politics with the border than work on solutions. They've now gone from denying that there is a crisis to accusing those working to stop it, our border agents, of actually creating a culture of cruelty, as some have said. Just yesterday, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee gratuitously and erroneously accused our Border Patrol agents of committing negligent homicide. I was in the hearing when he said it. The reality is that our border agents are working tirelessly on the crisis, which they did not create, and are lacking funding and resources from the very Democrats who are attacking them. You can't vote against funding for a crisis, and then, fiscal year 2019, more than 688,000 illegal aliens, including nearly 133,000 in May of 2019 alone, were apprehended between ports of entry along the southwest border, an increase of 80,000 since October of 2018. And while historically most immigrants were single adult males, 72% of all border enforcement actions in the last month were directed to unaccompanied alien children and family units. Fabricating stories of cruelty and besmirching the hardworking civil servants who are protecting the border and providing humanitarian assistance does nothing to help solve the problem. Putting a Band-Aid over the border crisis like we did 2 weeks ago does not fix the root causes. Democrats are serious about solving the border crisis, and let's address the Flores settlement agreement. Let's address asylum loopholes and the other statutory and judicial constraints that incentivize aliens to make a dangerous journey to the United States. Most of all, they must stop obstructing the border security wall. This is one of the greatest challenges of our time, and as we all know, it's getting worse by the day. Hope the Democrats will stop their obsession with attacking the president and actually work collaboratively to fix this crisis. And Mr. Chairman, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses. I appreciate the fact that even though initially we were going to have just the Democrats, you were allowed Republican witnesses from border states to participate in the first panel as well. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Let me very quickly preliminarily explain to the committee how this came about. Ms. Tlaib, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, and Ms. Presley contacted me over 2 weeks ago, and they made it clear that they wanted to go down to the border to observe as a committee, more of a committee assignment. I told them, go, and they decided they wanted to go and see for themselves. And I thank you all for doing that. Ms. Escobar helped make the arrangements, and it was her district, so that was, but I wanted them to come back to the committee and tell us what they observed. I welcome anybody who has gone down there and seen whatever you may have seen, so that the Congress, I think, can be sensitive to what's going on so that we can do something about it. And so for this panel, we invited, we will not have, to the panel, we will not have questions, and we also won't have exchanges among the witnesses.
Mr. Chairman, point of information, if I might.
Yes.
Yeah, you indicated they went down. So was this a Codell from this committee? Because I was not invited or was not even aware that we were doing it.
I'm going to answer you briefly, and then we're going to move on to these witnesses. No, it was not a Codell. They called me inquiring as to how it could be a Codell, and I told them, you're going to have to go on your own MRA, okay?
Yeah, but I don't know that our own MRA qualifies to actually do that.
However they did it properly. Am I right, ladies? They did it properly and within ethical rules, okay? All right. They took it upon themselves. We should applaud our members, even the Republican members who have visited these facilities concerning their interests, taking time for what would normally be their times in their districts and taking care of their families. They decided to go down there. Let's applaud them as opposed to, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I told you not to disrupt. I didn't mean it like that, but you get the picture. But anyway, let's move on.
Mr. Chairman, will you yield for one?
I'll yield, yeah.
To Mr. Meadows, the appropriate procedure, and we're following that with a Codell that we are taking this afternoon, is to get an invitation from the member's district where you want to visit. And upon having that invitation, you normally have to wait 2 weeks in order to get the Border Patrol to accommodate you. And if they followed that, which I'm sure they did, that is how they were able to make that trip. I yield back.
I've got to move on. Thank you all. Now, if to all members, if you have pictures or exhibits, we are more than willing to see them, but we ask that you please use them only during your testimony and then take them down. You will each have 5 minutes, and we will be happy to include in the record any additional materials you would like to submit. For each of you, the committee would like to know which specific detention centers you visited, when you went there, and what you personally witnessed while you were there. What I am going to, and we have to keep in mind that we've got a vote coming up at around 11, so it's my hope that we'll get all of you in before the vote. But to the members, to all members, after the vote, I'm coming back here to hear from our other witnesses. We have a very important panel coming after this panel, and I will be here till midnight if I have to be, because I think it's just that urgent. And so I'm going to begin with our Republican representatives. Representative Andy Biggs from Arizona. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chairman Cummings and Ranking Member Jordan. Members of the committee, I thank you for allowing me to testify before you today. I represent the 5th Congressional District of Arizona, which is a suburb of Phoenix, which is about 100 miles from the border. But I grew up in southern Arizona. I've traveled extensively in Mexico and been to our southern border many times. And I regularly visit the border today even. In the past few months, I have visited a CBP holding facility in Yuma, an ICE facility in Arizona, including that detention center is run by a private concern that is required to comply with federal regulations. I've led 2 groups of congressmen to the border and invited colleagues from across the aisle to come as well. When I led a group to the border a couple months ago, we were briefed by agents about the extent of human trafficking, and we learned about an 11-year-old girl that I'm going to call Maria today to protect her privacy. Agents learned that there was a human trafficking hub in South Carolina, moving directly from Yuma across to South Carolina. That's a long way to go. Working with DEA, ICE, and local law enforcement, agents located a small house that was the headquarters of a cartel affiliate. They were surprised to find Maria. They didn't know about her, or the 2 small boys that she was required to take care of by the cartel affiliate. They had been separated from their families when their parents allowed them to be taken by human trafficking cartels to create a fake family unit in order to get more favorable treatment when the adults they were placed with by the cartel traffickers crossed our border. Maria and the 2 little boys were intended to be taken back by human cartel smugglers to be used again to create a fake family unit. I asked how many similar trafficking rings exist in the United States and was told that there are hundreds all over the country. And this impacts tens of thousands of children who are given over to cartels and human traffickers by their parents to be used to facilitate human trafficking. I also think of Benito. Again, I changed his name. He was a 5-year-old little boy left in the desert by human traffickers who was found by CBP agents and was given emergency life-saving treatment. I've watched videos of agents rescuing sick or dying individuals in the desert or drowning in the Rio Grande who were saved at risk to the life and limb of the agents. Most of the time today by agents is no longer spent in securing the border, but is actually spent on humanitarian endeavors and actually trying to take care of children. Family separation for angel families like Steve Ronnebeck, whose son Grant was murdered by a multiple deportee, or Marianne Mendoza, whose son Brandon was killed by a multiple deportee, are two families permanently separated who live in my district. I visit regularly ports of entry and the vast open tracts between the ports. I speak to line agents, local law enforcement, residents on the border, and I visit facilities. When our group visited the holding facility in Yuma, designed to hold a maximum of 250 people for only up to 12 hours for processing, I was shocked to see more than 3 times that many people there. CBP had made makeshift arrangements to try and meet the conditions. People were crammed in. They were out on the patio area. They were in the parking lot. They were given mats to sleep on. We came back and we put in special orders. We did various statements urging immediate help from our colleagues to the CBP and thousands of people crossing our border who were voluntarily surrendering themselves to the agents. We warned the difficulties that would be exacerbated if immediate relief was not undertaken. Months ago, while many of my colleagues were claiming that the border situation was a manufactured crisis, we were urging immediate action because the circumstances were horrible. They were overcrowded. They were horrible. There was clean water. There still is clean water. There was food. There was sanitary supplies. There was bedding supplied. But it was rudimentary. We needed help then. And now to refer to these folks who are doing their best dealing with a horrible situation. At that time, remember, Yuma was transferring 130 people a day to overcrowded ICE facilities. They were releasing 120 a day into the community. But when you're catching or apprehending or people surrendering at the turn of 4,500, you don't have enough supplies. You don't have enough facilities. It is a crisis. It is real. And we do not get anywhere by blaming the people who are doing their best to help these people. We need to look in the mirror. We need to make the changes. We need to provide the funding necessary to get this done. Calling these Auschwitz-style concentration camps, or is indicating that these people that are trying to enforce the law are somehow Nazi-type war criminals. Or yesterday we heard they were child abusers. That doesn't help solve the problem. It's a real problem. We need to solve it. We can do it. We have to do it.
Thank you very much. Representative Cloud.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and thank you for the opportunity to share the story of those of us who live in border states and have experienced this humanitarian and criminal crisis for decades. First of all, I'd like to thank the men and women of the Border Patrol and the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement for their continued service to this nation. Many of them are veterans who view this job as a way to continue their service to our great nation. Many have served overseas to preserve our freedom on the front lines and defending our borders at home. They view as a way to continue their service back home. Many of them realize, the men and women serving, realize that protecting the homeland and defending our border by fighting back against the corrupting influence of cartels is just as important to the communities and families across this nation as fighting overseas. Wednesday marked the one-year anniversary from when I was sworn into office. What I've learned in a year is that many members of Congress would rather talk about a problem than actually fix it. Thankfully, the President has made this a priority, and it's past time for Congress to do the same. I cannot understand why we would allow this problem to continue when we know what would help to fix it. Close the asylum loopholes cartels use to exploit people, fix the Flores settlement so that we can ensure families remain together, and many other situations or circumstances or solutions that are been presented before. Shortly after I was sworn in, I visited the Texas border, not for the first time, and was asked by I asked Border Patrol what would be a win, and they told me situational awareness. That was in August of last year when 16,744 migrants were apprehended by the RGV sector. In June of this year, that number has nearly tripled. There were 43,197 apprehensions in that sector alone. Our current border facilities are not designed to handle these current numbers. Border Patrol and ICE are doing the best they can with extremely limited resources that we have given them. They understand they don't have the tools and resources they need to even begin thinking about mitigating the influence cartels have in our nation, because Border Patrol is undermanned and underfunded, and Congress has done nothing to help. During our visit just a few weeks ago, the phrase I heard over and over is, "There is no end in sight." The southern part of Texas's 27th Congressional District, the district I'm proud to represent, is roughly 2 hours from the U.S.-Mexican border town of McAllen, Texas. If fixing this crisis had been left up to Texas, we would have done it several years ago. Widely recognized as a fatal funnel, two major interstates, US 281 and US 77, come up from Mexico and feed right through our district. Why is it called the fatal funnel? Time magazine ran a story in May of 2015 titled "The Border Corridor of Death Along America's Second Border." Customs and Border Protection even warns in their website, if you're traveling on highways US 281 and US 77, please be cautious of your surroundings as smuggling activity runs rampant. Or take the Houston HIDTA 2018 threat assessment that's filled with examples of drug and human smuggling conducted by the Gulf and Los Zetas cartels through the district and surrounding area. Or take the story of 19 migrants who were found dead in the back of a tractor-trailer truck 10 minutes from my house in Victoria. They died in a tractor-trailer truck in the sweltering heat. Authorities found a 5-year-old boy who had died in his father's arms. Deputy Chief Roy Boyd of Victoria County Sheriff Office says that gangs are moving more and more into slave trade now because of how profitable it is. While a kilo of cocaine or any drug can be sold once, human beings can be sold numerous times every day. Boyd says that these migrants are being sold into slavery, both sex slavery and labor. The RAND Corporation recently published a study that said, we found the revenues from smuggling migrants from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras combined could have ranged from a total of about $200 million to a total of about $2.3 billion in 2017. Let's let that sink in when we consider the resources we're giving to our resources at the border. Congress is allowing these cartels to massively profit because we refuse to close off the avenues they are using to smuggle migrants. This is not just these gut-wrenching stories either. At the end of May, I, along with Representatives Grothman and Heiss, went to the border. We were briefed by Border Patrol on who and what is coming across the border. We were joined by my friend Hector Garcia and the National Border Patrol Council on a ride-along through the night to see how these fine men and women at the Border Patrol use the meager resources they have to prioritize life, provide for these migrants, and defend our country. We visited a ranch where we heard stories of those who live on the ranch are fearful for their own lives because of the number of the cartel members smuggling through their own property. They're afraid to walk their own land. The manager of that ranch said his wife cannot go on a walk or run around the property without the dog and a gun. Cartels cut chains and locks, bust through fences with their trucks, use private property to avoid stations. Somehow these are the stories that the media fails to report, but sadly what's become normal for the people of South Texas. Let me leave you with this story I've shared before, but it's worth sharing. I visited an unaccompanied minor facility. There were a number of young ladies there, about a couple hundred. I asked them about the care and what these young ladies had been through. They said about 40% of them have been sexually abused along the journey. This is the tragedy we've allowed to metastasize while many in Congress spent months claiming this was a fake, manufactured crisis. Real compassion would have been for us to do something about this and have the wisdom and foresight to avoid the situation that we've seen over the last couple of weeks, instead of implementing policies that enable what the cartels are doing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scott. Representative Cloud. Representative Blisco, and welcome to our committee.
Thank you and good morning. You know, I don't know if I should be jealous with all the pictures being taken over my colleagues or not, but it's a good morning. And Chairman Cummings, Ranking Member Jordan, and members of Congress, thank you for giving us this opportunity. You know, sometimes I feel, have you ever seen a movie where they have parallel universes, where you're in one world in this situation, you're in another world in this situation? Well, that's what I feel like we're in, quite honestly. In some of my Democrat colleagues' worlds, they seem to think that all of a sudden, out of the blue, thousands of illegal immigrants showed up at the border and are just oblivious to the year-long calls by Republicans and some Democrats for years for immigration reform, knowing that our loose immigration laws are what's incentivizing people to come here and what's causing the crisis. In my world, what I believe is the real world, the crisis has been mounting for years. And people like me have sounded the alarm for years, over and over and over again, and tried to enact legislation to fix it. But unfortunately, many of my Democratic colleagues have fought me over and over again at every turn. I'm from Arizona. I'm from a border state. I don't live in a state thousands of miles away, so we've been living this for many, many years. And I used to serve in the state Senate and the state House. And I was a co-sponsor, along with my colleague, Representative Biggs, on SB 1070. Because we knew, we were there, we were on the ground, and we knew that the immigration laws were not being enforced. And we thought, okay, well, let's have the state try to enforce it. Well, we were fought at every turn by every of my Democrat colleagues there and the president. In my Democrat friends' world, the crisis at the border, they say, was manufactured. We heard it for months. In January, Speaker Pelosi and Schumer said it was a manufactured crisis. House Democrat Whip laughed when asked if there was a crisis at the border and said, absolutely not. 38 freshman Democrats sent a letter to Senator Majority Leader McConnell requesting that Congress end this manufactured crisis. Democrat Homeland Security Committee Chairman tweeted, "The president has manufactured a humanitarian crisis." In my world, President Trump and Republicans have been sounding the alarm for years. I mean, my goodness, we're going to have over 1 million illegal immigrants that we apprehend. That's more than one congressional district a year. And the pounds, even in Yuma, Arizona, just recently, hundreds of pounds of meth. And last year, Republicans led 2 immigration bills that we thought were a compromise, where it gave DACA recipients legal status in one of the bills. Another of the bills, it gave DACA recipients a pathway to citizenship. But not one of my Democrat colleagues voted yes, not one single one. Unfortunately, in my Democrat colleagues' world, in judiciary yesterday, I am a member too. I heard over and over again how CBP are child abusers. And one member, one of my colleagues, said, oh, they're getting treated worse than prisoners of war. I mean, really, let's get down to the business of solving the problem. And I encourage everyone to watch a video by Tucson Sector Border Chief Patrol Agent Roy Villarreal. And the video shows clearly that there are supplies in the detention centers. And this whole issue about drinking out of the toilet is wrong. No one drinks out of a toilet. No one is being asked to drink out of a toilet. There's a combined unit where at the top you have drinking water, and the Border Patrol chief drank the water. They're not drinking out of toilets. So please, American public, there's no one asking people to drink out of toilets. We really need to solve the root of this problem. We need to get to the base of it, and I call on my Democrat colleagues. We're all passionate about this issue. Let's actually solve the root of the problem, work on legislation together. Let's get this done. And I yield back.
Thank you very much. Representative Roy.
I thank the chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing and allowing us to give us the time to testify this morning. As many of you know, I represent Texas 21, Austin and San Antonio. The southwest edge of Texas 21 is about 95 miles from the border of Mexico. I've toured facilities multiple times in my career as a lawyer for the Senate Judiciary Committee, as a federal prosecutor, as a staffer for Governor Perry, as the first assistant attorney general, and now as a congressman. I've been to the border multiple times, and it didn't just come recently putting on a show in front of fences for the media. It's come over a career of trying to figure out how to secure the border and do our job. My chief of staff went to the border this last Saturday down to Clint to go to the facility after hearing all of the horror stories. My chief of staff had a very different experience in terms of what he saw, in terms of the cleanliness of facilities, in terms of Border Patrol trying to do its job, trying to make sure that people are taken care of after a long, hard journey through Mexico, making sure they do have potable water, including having water containers right outside the very cells where we were told that they didn't have water to drink, having the toothpaste, the food, the diapers, the things that are necessary to take care of people after a long, hard journey, while this body has failed to secure the border and created the very magnet that is causing these migrants to come through and be abused by cartels, while this body cowardly sits in the corner doing nothing about it. The untold stories that are going on by cartels, these are the stories. At certain station, gangs boarded the trains and demanded a toll. The rate was $100 per station. They threatened us. They said they would hold us until we could call a relative to arrange to pay. If you couldn't pay, they would throw you off the roof. Johnny was separated from his family on the train, and it's unclear what happened to his wife and children. Just 2 weeks ago, a 19-year-old woman fell from one of these trains in Tacotapal, Mexico, killing her. The train stopped near the Tabasco state town, and the woman hopped off to buy some cheese-stuffed rolls, and when the train crowded with migrants began to move again, she hustled to climb her back aboard. But the train suddenly stopped. She lost her grip and fell beneath its wheels. It dragged her 100 yards before jerking forward again in a thunder of shuddering steel. Coyotes take advantage of our system, leading women and children to the border, while along the journey, 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted. This is the reality of what's happening between the Northern Triangle and Texas. This is what is happening because we refuse to do our job. What about Border Patrol? Sergio Tinoco was born into poverty in South Texas, as his mother remained in Mexico and he was forced to work hard labor on a farm to support himself. He served in our military for 10 years and then became a Border Patrol agent protecting the land in which he grew up in the Rio Grande Valley. He wanted this comment to be told. Quote, "The last thing this son of Mexican immigrants expected was to be compared to Nazis by America's elites for serving his nation and protecting our dangerous border." He said, "Our agents are just completely overwhelmed. They are exhausted. Not only are they exhausted out in the field, exhausted inside the stations processing, they are exhausted with all of the rhetoric that's coming down through the media and this Congress. Our own congressional leaders are vilifying our agents. These are the people holding America's front line." Add to these thoughts, and this is an article that Sergio Tinoco wrote that appeared July 5th, 2019. Add to these thoughts an exhausting 10-hour shift of seeing hundreds of illegal immigrants at the facility you work in and out in the field at temperatures over 100 degrees. Add a countless amount of mothers and fathers telling the agent that their child is sick and needs attention. Add being in a facility that can only hold 300 detainees but is currently holding 1,200, all waiting to be processed and released because of the immigration loopholes that brought them here in the first place. More so, add having just rescued a mother and child from drowning in the Rio Grande, caring for an infant after being stung by a swarm of bees in the high brush at the area where they entered the country illegally. Add the memory of finding a decomposing dead individual who was left behind by the ruthless smuggler because of an injury or exhaustion. A Border Patrol agent should be going home at the end of shift to decompress and leave all these matters behind at the workplace. Those things will be waiting for the agent again tomorrow. There will be another daring rescue, another small caravan of over 1,000 individuals to deal with and try to fit into an already overcrowded facility. There will be another set of individuals or kids requiring medical attention, which the agents will tend to. But now, with comments such as these, the Border Patrol agent must go home and hear about how their families have also heard those comments depicting mom or dad as a murderer of kids and their parents, how mom or dad are running gas chambers to kill all the illegal immigrants. The fact is, both parties have failed. The GOP all too often want to stand at the Rio Grande with a no trespassing sign while winking at immigrants and with a help wanted sign in the other. Meanwhile, my Democrat colleagues prefer to stand in front of chain link fences next to an empty parking lot while making up hyperbole for clicks, Twitter followers, and cynical politics. There is a path to fix this. Take out the cartels. Recognize that they're terrorist organizations. Fix our asylum laws to be welcoming but not tragically abused by cartels. End catch and release and give ICE the resources to do their jobs. President Obama sent up a bill for $760 million for ICE. Why were we not funding ICE so that we have a place to be able to put people when they come through Border Patrol? It is time for action. This Texan is not going to sit by and watch his state and Texas communities get overrun and abused because the cowards of the swamp sit idly by and cynically fail to do their job.
Thank you very much. Ms. Escobar, Representative Escobar, let me say this before you go on. I want to thank you for working so closely with us to make this hearing happen, and I really appreciate you very much. Thank you. You may go forward.
Chairman Cummings, Ranking Member Jordan, members of the committee, thank you for calling this hearing and for the privilege of testifying before you today. I am proud to live not near, but on the U.S.-Mexico border in El Paso, Texas, a community that has long been safe and secure, a modern-day Ellis Island. For 7 months, my office has facilitated delegation visits to El Paso, 10 so far and more to come, and I'm grateful for all of those who've been able to or will soon join us to bear witness to what is happening at the hands of the U.S. government. There is no doubt that the increasing number of migrants at our southern border has presented a challenge. Unfortunately, in the last 2 years, our country has failed to live up to our founding values when addressing that challenge. Before I focus on what our government is doing, let me tell you what my community is doing. For years, but especially in this last year, El Paso has stepped up, helping feed, shelter, and offer hospitality to thousands of migrant families released by DHS week after week. My community, with a fraction of the resources available to the federal government, has responded more strategically, thoughtfully, and compassionately than the federal government has. El Paso knows that this is not a matter of resources, but a matter of will. El Paso has had to stand up shelters on a moment's notice, transport hundreds of migrants daily using only volunteers, and we've opened our wallets and our hearts to ensure that every one of those vulnerable souls has a clean, safe place to stay once out of custody. El Paso made the choice to employ compassion and goodwill. And then we have the choice that our government has made. Our government, at the hands of this administration, has exhibited an incompetence and cruelty that has created a human rights crisis in our own country. Under the Trump administration, border communities have borne witness to the deaths of at least 6 children in government custody since September. Family separation, a practice called illegal by the United Nations, one which, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, inflicts deep, lifelong trauma. A policy so heinous that the sound of a weeping child secretly recorded in a detention facility moved even some of the most hardline anti-immigrant Americans. El Paso was the testing ground for child separation, a policy that continues to this day. We've seen severe overcrowding in Border Patrol processing centers that is so inhumane that the DHS Office of the Inspector General described it as dangerous because it represents an immediate risk to agents and migrants alike. We've seen conditions that dehumanize migrants, stripping them of their dignity, sending good agents into states of despondency, giving cover to bad agents who abuse their authority. There is long-term detention in ICE facilities where, in my district, a group of men requesting asylum who had been detained for nearly a year became so desperate they went on a hunger strike. They were force-fed and hydrated through tubes that were placed down their nose. Speaking through their pain and their bloodied tubes, they told me they would rather die in America than be sent back to India. We've seen migrant protection protocols. It's the administration's practice of sending legal asylum seekers into another country as they await their hearing, a violation of due process that puts vulnerable populations in danger. In one case, a woman had warned CBP about the danger she faced in Ciudad Juarez, was sent back to Mexico where she was kidnapped and brutally gang raped. My district is ground zero for these atrocities. And because my office inquires about these cases, in line with my oversight responsibilities, I have become a target. These policies have created the humanitarian crisis and a moral one. I commend colleagues who've worked to address these issues, from Congresswoman Lofgren focusing on the root causes, to Congressman Raul Ruiz, who's focused on medical standards for migrants in CBP custody. I, too, have legislation that will be coming up shortly, H.R. 2203, the Homeland Security Improvement Act, which would increase accountability and transparency at DHS so that these conditions, these deaths, these abuses can be relegated to a dark moment in history. This is not about resources, and to prove it, one only needs to look at what El Paso, Texas has done without any. This is about having the will to treat people with dignity. We have the power to change this. Do we have the will? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ocasio-Cortez.
Mr. Chair, I would like to be sworn in.
I'm sorry?
I would like to be sworn in.
Oh, all right. We usually don't require a swearing in, but you want to be sworn in? Fine.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Do you stand up, please. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated. Let the record reflect that Ms. Ocasio-Cortez answered in the affirmative. You may proceed.
Good morning, Chairman Cummings, Ranking Member Jordan, and distinguished members of this committee. When I was asked to testify today, I frankly didn't know where to begin after our visit to the border. Much has been made about the fact that we have said that this is a manufactured crisis. And in many ways, it is manufactured in that it is wholly unnecessary. It is unnecessary to separate children from their families. It is unnecessary to have a policy to detain innocent women and families that have harmed no person and are legally seeking asylum in the United States of America. It is unnecessary to have a policy that calls children unaccompanied when they arrive with older brothers, sisters, and grandparents, and treat them no differently than human traffickers. And in speaking of trafficking, it is completely unnecessary for this administration to choose to implement policies like metering and so-called Remain in Mexico policies that dump innocent people in dangerous territories that puts them right in the crosshairs of human traffickers, ripe for picking. This is a manufactured crisis because the cruelty is manufactured. This is a manufactured crisis because there is no need for us to do this. There's no need for us to overcrowd and to detain and under-resource. There is no need for us to arrest innocent people and treat them no differently than criminals when they are pursuing their basic human rights. Much has been made about CBP agents in this hearing as well, and this is not their fault. And in some respects, in many respects, I agree, because it is a policy of dehumanization implemented by this executive administration, laid at the feet of Stephen Miller, that creates a tinderbox of violence and dehumanization where hurt people hurt people. I would like to seek unanimous consent to submit the records of the names of 17 women I met during my trip to the border. I think one of the reasons, and what has been spoken of, is that there's two different universes, and it feels like we're speaking in two different worlds. And one of the reasons for that, I believe, is because when I when we took our tour of the border, one of the first things that we were told was that we were not allowed to speak to the migrants, that we were not allowed to have contact with them, that we shouldn't. And this was given for reasons of, quote, their safety or for the expediency of the tour. And after we entered and after we were asked to surrender our cell phones at the beginning of the tour, we went in, and one of the CBP officers, after that morning, it being revealed by ProPublica, which I would also seek unanimous consent to submit to the record. While it was revealed by ProPublica, a secret Facebook group where CBP members were planning to harm or encouraging harm of myself and Congresswoman Escobar, as well as mocking the deaths of migrant children. Into that environment, we walked into this facility. We were asked to surrender our phones and be guarded by the people without a guarantee that no one there was in that Facebook group. We went in, and one of the officers attempted to sneak a photograph of myself and other congressional members. And at that point, we asked to enter one of the cells. We were allowed to speak to the women, and these are the women that we spoke to. It's their handwriting. And while we are being asked to speak only to officers, we are not getting the accounts of migrants, of their treatment, of what they are experiencing. And so when these women tell me that they were put into a cell and that their sink was not working, and we tested the sink ourselves and the sink was not working, and they were told to drink out of a toilet bowl, I believed them. I believed these women. I believed the canker sores that I saw in their mouths because they were only allowed to be fed unnutritious food. I believed them when they said they were sleeping on concrete floors for 2 months. I believed them. And what was worse about this, Mr. Chairman, was the fact that there were American flags hanging all over these facilities, that children were being separated from their parents in front of an American flag, that women were being called these names under an American flag. We cannot allow for this.
Representative Green, who is a medical doctor, just told me she'll be okay. Thank you, Representative Green. I really appreciate it. It's good to have a doctor in the house. Amen. Miss, since I interrupted you, I'll give you 30. I'm sorry. We'll give you a minute to wrap it up.
Thank
please.
you, Mr. Chair, and I know my time was wrapping up at that time, so and again, we have to make sure that, and over again, when we spoke to these folks, whether it was agents, whether it was HHS officials, oftentimes they said the thing that we need most is not resources, we need policy change. So we need to change our metering policies. We need to change our detention policies. We need to change our policies on who we call unaccompanied. And that is one of the key areas, in addition to changing our policy on foreign affairs, on investment, on being an equal partner in Latin America and the Western Hemisphere. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ms. Tlaib, again, I want to thank you for your phone call about 2 weeks ago when you wanted to pull together things to get down there, go down to the border. Thank you very much. You have now 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairman, honorable members of the committee. Thank you all for this critically important hearing today, and shukran, which means thank you, Chairman Cummings, for always creating a space for us in this committee. From the first week, you said we give you new energy. I hope that's still the case, so thank you. By allowing us to testify before this committee and enter what we observed and experienced in our visit to El Paso border on July 1st to the CPP Station 1 and the camp into the congressional record. I appreciate that responsibility and not picking on the president, but holding this administration accountable. First, no one is illegal. That term is derogatory now because it dehumanizes people. You can say any other forms of maybe coming in without regulations or so forth, but the use of illegal is disrespectful, and I ask my colleagues to try in so many ways to not dehumanize our immigrant neighbors that are trying to come in for a safe haven. Mr. Speaker, while working at human service and community advocacy organizations, I learned early on that to truly bring power to the table, to see what is at stake, you have to bring people in the room who can't be here. So I'm asking for Jacqueline, who was age 7, from Guatemala, who died from sepsis while in our care. She was the same age as my son when I heard about it. Mr. Speaker, we do have a crisis at our border. It is one of morality. As we have seen this current strategy unfold, intentional and cruelly created by the Trump administration, dead set on sending a hate-filled message that those seeking refuge are not welcome in America, in our America, and that the rule of law, human rights, will not protect them here. Instead, Mr. Chairman, it's a dangerous ideology that rules our nation right now. I've been so deeply haunted by the unforgettable image of a 4-year-old boy coming up to me through a glass door of a cell he was in with a number of other children, asked me in Spanish where his papa was, and slid a very small board to me so I could write something on it. It was like a dry board. I'm not sure what he needed before an agent asked me to stop engaging him. Chairman, again, bringing those who can't be here into this room, I asked my colleagues to see a drawing from one of the children in the cages, in the cells, up there, and I want you to not look away. I ask you and beg you not to look away. But the suffering in these illegal and immoral camps isn't just limited to those children. Something I learned, Mr. Chairman, is that I was able to travel to Clint, Texas, and meet face-to-face mothers, fathers, grandparents who are suffering, ripped away from their families, not knowing if they ever see their children and loved ones again. I won't forget the father from Brazil who held on to his son with tears in his eyes as he told me in English he just wants his son to be an American boy. He said he was with his wife, his 8-year-old daughter, and teenage boy in a tent-like space outside of Station 1. He said he's been there for 4 days. I won't forget Daisy, the grandmother who had a red ribbon on her wrist with the name of the medication she needs, who said she had been in detention for 40 days, and she hadn't seen her grandson, who was mentally impaired, since being separated from him when they arrived. I wonder every day where she is now and whether or not she's hungry. The fear in their eyes won't be forgotten, Mr. Speaker, but the suffering in these illegal camps cannot be forgotten. Imagine traveling thousands of miles in grueling and dangerous conditions because you have no other option only to be separated from your family, from your children, thrown into overcrowded cages, denied a shower, toothbrush, and yes, Mr. Chairman, drink water out of a toilet if you're thirsty. Now imagine doing that while pregnant. In Clint, I met Betty's, a woman pregnant with her first child. She smiled at me, and I instantly connected with her. She had a pink hoodie on, and I instantly just went towards her, even though they told us not to talk to anybody, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't not go to somebody that's smiling at me. And I said, hello, and she said hello in English. And I love that she felt confident to speak to me in the broken English. And she said, she found out, I said, how long have you been here? She said 27 days. And she said, I'm with a child. And she glowed. She was so happy because she had not known she was pregnant until she came here. But by showing up, Mr. Chairman, she is free now. The following day, she is free now, and we are following the asylum process, and she is now home. I spoke to her last week. She's so happy. She said, you will be part of my family forever. Mr. Chairman, it needs to be noted into record. I spoke to CPB agents, even though they told us not to speak to them too. Remember that? And I said, what do you think we need to do because you guys are overwhelmed? They said, one of them, stop sending money, it's not working. Another one said, I wasn't trained for this. I am not a social worker. I am not a medical care worker. He actually said, I want to be at the border. That's what I was trained to be at. The last one, Mr. Chairman, the separation policy isn't working, he said. He knew about the separation policy that he was enacting. CPP morale is one of the lowest among law enforcement agencies, Mr. Chairman. Since between 2017 and 2018, we had a high of 100 agents committing suicide. That needs to be put in record. The dehumanization is not only with those families, but it's also with the agents that we've had told to do this to these families. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ms. Presley.
Chairman Cummings, Ranking Member Jordan, and colleagues of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. I believe that it is both our opportunity and obligation as members of Congress to shed light on injustice and to lift the voices of the unheard. Make clear that I don't say the voiceless. Every person has a voice, but our institutions do not always listen. So today, I do not speak on behalf of anyone, but I make space for the stories our nation so desperately needs to hear in this moment. Mr. Chairman, I cannot unsee what I've seen. I cannot unfeel what I experienced. I refuse to. Although admittedly it robs me of sleep and peace of mind, but that pales in comparison to the pain felt by families that have been robbed of their liberty, their legal rights, and their dignity, and some even the lives of their babies. During our stop at the El Paso Border Patrol facility, I pressed my hand to a plexiglass window. I met the gazes of several women on the other side. Their shoulders were slumped, their clothes filthy, their eyes vacant. I turned to a Border Patrol officer and asked, what is the temperature in this room? The officer responded, I do not know. I then asked how they set the temperatures in the room. He mumbled again, he did not know. Mr. Chairman, on the day of our visit, it was a sweltering 103 degrees in El Paso. What's the heat index at which you bring folks indoors? I inquired. Border Patrol responded with no answer. The most basic of questions about the care and welfare of those held in the custody of our government were either dismissed or met with a non-answer, affirming what we know. This agency was never built, never designed, never trained for the care and keeping of families. These families need trauma supports, caseworkers, clean water, adequate and nutritious food. Instead, they have received a level of degradation we should be ashamed is occurring on American soil. Once we realized we were not going to get the answers we needed from CBP officers, my colleagues and I pushed our way through a doorway to speak directly with a group of approximately 10 to 15 women who were detained in a small room. These women held thin blankets. They sat on the cold concrete. They had tears in their eyes, and as we walked in, relief and release as they collapsed at a sign of compassion. My colleagues, Representatives Kennedy and Ocasio-Cortez, translated the women's stories as quickly as they could. I held the hand of a woman who heaved sobs as she explained her deep fear that at any moment she could fall to the floor in a seizure. She is an epileptic, and the medicine she relies on had been confiscated. And in fact, she feared that by telling that truth, she would experience retaliation after we left, and her medication would continue to be withheld. I spoke to another woman who wept in my arms, crying for her baby. She didn't care to know my name. She didn't care to know who we were. She simply craved compassion. She wanted to be treated like a human being. She asked me if she deserved to be treated like this, if they deserved to be treated like dogs. Each had survived a treacherous journey, overcoming tremendous obstacles. And while I'm not fluent in Spanish, Mr. Chairman, I want you to understand that there was no barrier to understanding in that room. We speak the universal language of pain, of a mother's love, of justice. These women are not voiceless, Mr. Chairman, but they are cruelly and criminally unheard. Not today. Today, Congress has an opportunity to listen and to act. After everything these women have endured, fleeing violence, deep poverty, sexual violence, domestic abuse, they arrive at the crest of this nation only to be torn apart from their babies and thrown in cages for seeking asylum, a legal right, a human right. And in spite of all of that, they believe so fiercely in the promise of this nation. Mr. Chairman, on that concrete floor sat women with a deep and abiding love for a nation that had known only as a captor. In spite of the abuse and adversity they had endured, all they desperately wanted to do was to hold their babies and have this nation give them a chance to make a credible fear claim, a chance to make it to a court date, a chance to make the case that they would work so fiercely to make this nation their home, just as generations and generations before them have done. They begged us for forgiveness, Mr. Chair. What will we say to this generation of children and parents we imprisoned for seeking safety? We should be the ones begging for forgiveness. All they want is one more chance to make their way, to protect their families, to live, and I do not know what is more American than that.
Thank you very much. I want to thank our entire panel, all of you, for laying out the case, what you have observed and your opinions. I really appreciate the way you've done it. We are now going to move to the next panel. Again, thank you all. And we're going to, how long? That's it. To the members, the vote is expected at around 11:35. So we're going to start up the second panel as soon as they get seated. That'll be in about 2 or 3 minutes.